I be that young rapping dude, might just trap with you. Coming with the thunder, baby, might just clap your crew. I roll.
Hello soul divers, welcome to another Destroyer Lava Valley guide. But in this video, we will only talk about the playstyle, item build, skill build, and familiars that I would prefer to use on my destro when I get them, and I'll explain why, so that you will have a better understanding on how I play Destroyer. First, let's talk about playstyle. Destroyers are mostly the engager or the tank for the team. This means that you'll be the one to go first into enemy range and soak up the damage for your team, so that your team will have a better space in dealing their damage since the enemy skills are already used on you and are on cooldown. Next is the setter. Your role as a setter would be to pull multiple enemies with your seismic power, so that your team would be able to make better use of their AoE skills, as they will hit multiple enemies because of your set. You can still be the engager or tank while being the setter, but it is better as a setter to have another ally on the front line, like a swordsman or another destroyer, that will divide up enemies' attention and target, which will give you better chance and timing to do a good set with seismic power. Next is the locker. In this role, you will lock your eyes on a single target, and completely focus on that one so that they will not have a good space in killing your allies and make them spend all their skills on you. Most of the time, you will only do this against an enemy with high CP difference on your team. You will see an example on such playstyle in my first video, where I locked down a high CP which was 100k CP higher than my team and was 200k CP higher than me. And lastly, the protector. In this role you will protect an ally against enemies or against a single enemy. This can go in hand with the role of being a locker. Against the high CP which I mentioned, I locked her and protected my engineer against her, as I saw it as the win condition for my team. Let's go over some gameplay tips first, before going to the builds. First is the bread and butter combo of Destroyer, for catching enemies, which is Leap Slam, Tumble to a better position, and Seismic Power. Let me show you a demonstration of this combo. In this clip, I'm going to Leap Slam onto this rogue, Tumble to a better position which would be in the middle of them, then use the Seismic Power. The next skill you would want to use after Seismic Power should be a disable skill, which is your Brutal Strike to knock them down, or Battle Cry or Lightning Orb if you have them. Such usage of combos would be personal preference, and depending on the situation. For example, sometimes you might not need to Leap Slam and just use Tumble and Seismic Power when a good chance comes. And sometimes you might not have to tumble after Leap Slam before using Seismic Power. One problem that you might face when doing this combo is getting disabled or controlled right after using Leap Slam. That's why sometimes it's a good choice to just bait out high cooldown skills first, like Grasping Thorn and most special skills with disable, before going in for the set. Next is the usage of your buffs, which would most probably be Frozen Shards and Frenzy Charge. Don't use them too early and try to time your usage of them when you know that you are about to commit an entry, because the buffs and shield only lasts for a few seconds, and they help a lot in sustaining damage when you go in. Now that we have identified that my main playstyle for Destroyer is tanking and setting for the team, let us now go for the item build or items that I would prefer to use when I get them, and why. First, let's go over the weapons. As you may have already guessed, of course the best weapon for PvP or Lava Valley is the Decimation Hammer, as its bonuses increase damage to players. Unfortunately, the only way to get this weapon is through the Asterite shop, by buying the Decimation chest that contains the weapon itself, or get lucky and get it from the Asterite chest. Next up is the normal 4-star Earth Hammer, or the Divine Hammer. It's good because of the damage increase from your basic skills, which you will mostly rely from on dealing damage. Also, it's really easy to awaken the normal 4-star weapons compared to the rare weapons, which is also the reason why I will include the normal 4-star fire weapon, Guardian's Hammer. Even though in Lava Valley, I rarely use basic attacks unless given a good chance to do so, and which are also the reasons why I will not include the Kronos Hammer. It is hard to awaken rare weapons, and again, I normally don't rely on basic attacks in Lava Valley, so I'd rather include the 4-star normal water weapon, Champion's Hammer. More awaken on weapons is equal to more stats, and this weapon will also increase the damage of seismic power and other special skills. Now, your weapon set should look like this. One if with Decimation Hammer, and the other one is when without it. Next is the armor. I would always prefer the Imperial Coat, but unfortunately, it can only be obtained from the Asterite shop as well. So we'd be left to choose between these two. But I would prefer Black Knight armor more, because being disabled or controlled in Lava Valley is more of a problem for me. Next is the boots. My only option are these two, because the boots that gives basic attack evasion is not really good for Lava Valley in my opinion, because mostly, people only use skills to damage then retreat when their skills are on cooldown like I also do. Because it is better to retreat and wait for the cooldown of your skills, rather than being in a risky position, while trying to do a basic attack, while your enemies might have their skills. In the gloves, I choose this one because destroyers are somehow reliant on their special skills, especially on seismic power when it comes to doing a set. That's why reducing special skill cooldown works best for me. In the helmet, I only prefer these two. Saintly Circlet is good for overall defense, while Immortal Helmet is a good combo with Black Knight armor. Right now, I prefer using the Saintly Circlet since it is fairly easier to awaken, but I will surely switch to Immortal Helmet when I get it together with Black Knight armor. For the necklace, I choose Invincible Beast over Tyrant Scale, because I believe it is more consistent and has way lesser cooldown. For the earrings, either of these two are good, so you may just choose which one you have or has a higher awaken. But I would prefer the Heaven's Judgments effect more because it will stun the furthest enemy, which means that it could be the enemy who is in a safe distance and is trying to do free hits on you, while the closest enemy on you is probably already getting hit by you and your teammates already. And lastly, the ring. I choose Abyss Crystal for the ring because of its slow effect on the enemy, which will increase the damage of rapid spin and will give you a better chance to hit your brutal strike. Before we head into the skill build, let me remind you that all of these are my personal preference only. They may not work well for others even if it works for me, because everyone has their own different playstyle. Now for the skill build. Let us head on first to the special skills. Of course, our first one is the Seismic Power. This is our best special skill for setting, and will also allow us to hit multiple enemies with Brutal Strike and Rapid Spin. The way to obtain and level up the skill is through the Domination Metal Shop. Next is the Frozen Shards. This skill is absolutely good if used properly. It will give you a big chunk of shield when going for an entry. It will heal a certain amount of HP. It will deal damage to enemies around when it gets destroyed, and will also slow the enemies as well. It's kind of an all-around skill, don't you think? Leveling up and using this skill is really worth it, but you may want to switch it out with Ignore Pain later on. But it's still a good sustained skill while you are still leveling up your Ignore Pain. You can also buy the tome for this skill from the Domination Metal Shop. Next up is the Battle Cry. The skill has a range as big as the Seismic Power. Every enemy that's hit by the skill will be taunted for 3 seconds, which means all they can do during that time is to do basic attacks on you. That is a very wide range for a 3 seconds disable, which makes it very lovely, and a very good combo skill with Seismic Power. You can already imagine how much you and your allies can do against enemies that can't control themselves for 3 seconds. Unfortunately, the only way to get this skill is by buying it from the shop, or buying Master's Magic Pass, or get lucky in World Boss and obtain it as a drop. This is the skill that makes people say that Destroyer is not F2P friendly, but you can certainly play Destroyer effectively even without the skill. There are other skills that can be effective as well. But first, let's talk about Frenzy Charge. I think that this skill is actually bad for Lava Valley. The increased basic attack damage effect and attack speed is not that useful, and we already know why. The Darkness Lightning effect, which stuns enemies, comes out randomly near you. That's why it doesn't really hit enemies often. Now let's talk about non-destroyer special skills and how they can be useful. First is the Static Field. This skill will stun enemies around you, which makes it a great skill to combo with Seismic Power. Next are the Lightning Orb and Shadow Disc. These skills are also good because of the stun they provide. You can use them from a distance to stun enemy before leaping onto them, which makes it a viable switch of skill in a 1 versus 1 situation. Next is the very popular Grasping Thorn. This skill binds enemies from a distance and actually deals a very large amount of damage. You can use this skill as a setup for your Shadow Disc or Lightning Orb to make sure they hit, or you can bind enemies after using Seismic Power. I think that's it for the special skills, and let's head on to the passives. First is the Avenging Fury. This passive helps you a lot in your sustain and speed for your entry after getting hit, and I think it's a no-brainer for a tank. Next is the Parry and Strong Will. As you'll notice, I chose these passives for increasing defense and sustain for survivability, because taking enemy damage is one of my main roles as a destroyer. Remember that having more levels on those skills will increase the defense and sustain they give, and the chance for parry to activate. That's it for the skills. Now let's move on to the familiars. First is the Bunnibut. Its rearm skill really helps a lot in sustain from the shield it provides, and most especially the resist rate on disables, which is one of our main problems as a destroyer. It will be a really good combo for the resist rate from Immortal Helmet. I think this familiar is the best for my destroyer in Lava Valley. Next is the Ebontorax. This can be a good alternative if you don't have the Bunnibut yet. The skill is just like a lesser version of it. Next is the Flutter Bee. I mostly like the skill for the movement speed it provides, which will be really useful when going for an entry or chasing an enemy, and the evasion rates are a bonus. Of course, the Stagthorn. The damage reduction it provides is a no-brainer for our destroyer. It's pretty much self-explanatory, so let's move on to the next one, which will be these two. Molten Lion makes you immortal for a few seconds, while Crab-O-Lantern will make you immune to damage for a few seconds. These effects are good and can change the tide of a game if used properly. This is it for the Destroyer Lava Valley build guide. If you have questions or suggestions, feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching and I hope you've learned something.